The yard buzzed like a hive on overdrive. Steel clangs from the pull-up bars mixed with shouted cadences and the bark of instructors pacing the perimeter. Dust clung to the air, kicked up by boots pounding the hard-packed ground, while the morning sun hit the training field with the first real heat of the day. 228 recruits were spread across the staging area, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for their turn on the gauntlet. It was the kind of obstacle course that didn't just test muscle and lungs, it tested whether your mind could stay sharp when everything else in you wanted to quit. Near the edge of all that energy, Elias Ward moved at his own pace. Mid-40s, maybe older, with skin tanned and lined from years no one here had asked about. He pushed a mop bucket across the yard. The wheels squeaked faintly every few feet. Faded coveralls hung loose over his frame, the elbows shiny from wear, the knees stained with years of work that never washed out. His boots were scuffed, the laces mismatched, one frayed down to a single stubborn thread. Most recruits didn't see him at all. The few that did stepped wide, not out of respect but because they didn't want cleaning water sloshed onto their boots. Elias didn't look up as they passed. His eyes stayed down on the concrete, tracing the arc of the mop, but every so often they shifted just slightly toward the far end of the yard where the gauntlet loomed. This year's setup was a monster. The instructors had been tweaking it for weeks, adding new elements until no one had cracked 12 minutes. The course wound through mud pits, rope climbs, swinging logs, narrow crawl tunnels, and at the center, that wall 20 feet of vertical plywood with jagged handholds and a final overhang that seemed to sneer at you from above. Elias's gaze lingered on it like a man looking at something he used to know by heart. Close by, a cluster of recruits leaned against the rail, waiting for their heat. One of them, a broad-shouldered kid with a sharp jaw and a voice made for drawing attention, tipped his chin toward Elias. "Bet the janitor couldn't even get past the rope climb," Briggs said, grinning at his buddies. The group laughed, some half-heartedly, others with the eager cruelty of the bored. Elias didn't so much as glance in their direction. He wrung the mop, let the dirty water swirl, and went back to pushing it across the yard in slow, even strokes. But something shifted in his eyes, brief, almost invisible. Not anger, not embarrassment, more like the flicker of a mental tape measure being pulled out, the kind of silent calculation that made no sound at all. The sun caught the damp streak his mop left behind, turning it into a shining strip across the concrete. Elias guided the bucket along its line, the squeak of the wheels fading under the roar of the first whistle. The recruits surged forward toward the gauntlet. Elias just kept moving, the mop sliding, the bucket rolling, his eyes now and then returning to that wall as though it were speaking to him in a language only he still understood. The whistle blew and the first wave of recruits tore across the starting line, boots hammering the dirt. The gauntlet didn't waste time easing them in it, began with a mud pit wide enough to swallow a truck. They hit it hard, water and muck exploding upward as they churned through waist-deep sludge. The cold pulled the breath out of them, but there was no pause. On the far bank, crawl tunnels waited, their narrow throats lined with wet gravel that chewed at elbows and knees. Instructors paced above the tunnels, shouting times, screaming at anyone who slowed. From there came the rope climbs, the lines slick from dozens of hands, the knots spaced just far enough to burn the forearms before you reached the top. A few recruits slipped before they were halfway up, hitting the ground with curses and frustration. Those who made it dropped onto swinging logs that rolled underfoot, sending more into the dirt. The air smelled of sweat, churned earth, and the sharp tang of iron from scraped palms. And then there was the wall. 20 feet of vertical plywood, patched from old repairs, its face scarred by clawing hands and failed attempts. The overhang at the top jutted out just enough to kill momentum. This was where the shouting died down, replaced by grunts, gasps, and the quiet defeat of recruits sliding back to the ground. Instructors timed each effort with cold precision, marking failures without comment. Briggs and his crew hit the course in the third wave. They charged in loud, clapping each other on the back, yelling promises about breaking records. They stormed the mud pit without hesitation, powered through the tunnels, grinned for the photographers on the rope climb. But when they reached the wall, the bravado cracked. Briggs was first up, his thick arms bulging as he hauled himself halfway, boots scrabbling for purchase. His fingers slipped on the worn edge, and he dropped the last 10 feet with a flat thud. His crew fared no better one, barely making it to the overhang before peeling away like wet paper. They limped to the finish line caked in mud, lungs heaving, their earlier jokes swallowed by exhaustion. Between heats, Elias was a shadow at the edge of the yard. While most eyes were on the recruits, he wandered to the cargo net section, where one rope hung loose. He bent to it without ceremony, fingers working the slack with quiet precision. The knots he tied weren't the crude overhands of maintenance work, they were compact, deliberate, and locked tight in a way that said they were meant to hold under far more than a cadet's weight. It took him less than 30 seconds. From the tower, Captain Rourke saw it. His eyes narrowed, following Elias until the janitor moved away, mop handle in hand once more. The efficiency had caught his attention, but he didn't call it out. Not yet. When the final group stumbled across the finish line and collapsed in the dirt, Rourke stepped forward. "Demonstration run," he called, voice carrying over the yard. "You've seen the course beaten in pieces, now you'll see it done right." The crowd turned toward the staging area, waiting for the designated instructor. But a runner intercepted Rourke, murmuring in his ear. Whatever was said made his jaw tighten. The instructor was gone pulled to some urgent duty elsewhere. Rourke looked over the gathered recruits, the silence stretching. From somewhere in the back, a voice cut through, "Let the janitor try." Laughter erupted. It rolled across the yard in waves, bouncing off the walls and echoing under the cloudless sky. Every head turned toward Elias, who stood by his mop bucket, one hand resting on the handle. He didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't even look at the one who'd shouted. His gaze drifted toward the course instead, pausing just for a heartbeat in the wall. Elias didn't ask for permission. He just stepped away from the mop bucket, the sound of the wheels rolling back an inch lost under the low ripple of voices. His fingers found the zipper at his chest, pulling it down in one smooth motion. The faded coveralls sagged around his hips before he shrugged free of them entirely, revealing a plain black shirt and training pants that hung easy on his frame. Nothing flashy, no brand names. Just fabric that moved with him like it had been worn in over years, not days. From his back pocket, he pulled a strip of black cloth and twisted it between his hands before tying it over his eyes. The knot was deliberate, centered, tight enough that the edges of the cloth pressed into the skin around his temples. The yard shifted. Some recruits chuckled under their breath, expecting a pratfall. Others went still, sensing something different in the way he stood. Briggs let out a laugh that was too loud, the kind that masks unease. "He's gonna trip in the first 10 feet. The whistle cut through everything. Elias moved. Not with the jittery burst of someone trying to impress, but with a steady rhythm that bent the course to his pace. He ducked under the first hurdle, rolled across the gravel with barely a sound, and came up already in stride. The mud pit swallowed him waist deep, but he never broke momentum, hands pulling, feet driving, shoulders twisting through the muck like he'd done it blind before. Which, judging by the cloth over his eyes, he had. On the rope climb, his palms found the knots without fumbling. Every pull was even, the kind of movement that didn't waste a heartbeat. Over the top, down the far side, and into the crawl tunnel she moved low and fast, elbows and knees sliding over wet gravel like it was just another floor to clean. By the swinging logs, a recruit muttered, "He's counting steps." Maybe. But if he was, it was happening somewhere deep in his body, where instinct did the math. Each landing was exact, each shift of weight ready for the next jump. Then the wall. That 20-foot slab that had broken the course's best all morning. Elias didn't slow. He closed the last few yards in a sprint, boots biting the ground. 2 steps up the face, then a leap. His right hand shot to the side, fingers catching a seam no one else had even looked for, a strip of recessed wood meant for maintenance crews. He pulled himself up in one smooth arc, legs swinging high, momentum carrying him over the overhang and onto the platform. The crowd noise died. Recruits stood with mud still dripping off them, eyes tracking him like they'd just seen something impossible. On the tower, instructors glanced at each other, some frowning, some with the faintest trace of recognition in their faces. Briggs didn't blink. His mouth hung open like he'd forgotten how to close it. Elias hit the ground running, the rest of the course folding behind him. Cargo net, balance beam, rope swing, every move was clean, each landing silent. When he crossed the finish, he didn't slow until the whistle blew again. 8 minutes, 11 seconds. Blindfold still tied, breath steady. For a long moment, no one said anything. Then Captain Rourke's voice came low, almost to himself. That's Ghost Viper precision. Several older instructors stiffened. One of them looked at Elias like they were trying to place a face from a classified file. Elias only reached up, untied the blindfold, and tucked it back into his pocket, his expression unreadable. They closed in on him the second the whistle faded, voices overlapping, hands reaching to stop him before he could disappear. How did you do that, Blind? Was that rehearsed? What's your real job here? Elias didn't answer any of them. He just reached up, tugged the blindfold loose, and let it hang around his neck like it had been nothing more than a rag he used for polishing brass. His face stayed unreadable, his pace unbroken as he threaded through the press of bodies toward the far corner of the yard. The mop bucket was still there, exactly where he'd left it. He gripped the handle, tipped it forward, and started pushing again, the wheels squeaking faintly over the concrete. Captain Rourke caught him halfway across the yard. His boots crunched to a stop in front of the bucket, forcing Elias to halt. Where'd you learn to move like that? The captain's tone wasn't casual, it had the weight of a man who already suspected the answer. Elias's eyes lifted just enough to meet his. Somewhere you don't have clearance for, he said, voice flat. Then he sidestepped, eased the bucket past, and kept moving. An hour later, in the shade of the officer's tent, a manila folder slid across Rourke's desk. It was worn soft at the corners, its cover stamped with the red block letters, classified. No name on the tab, just a number string and a date 7 years old. Rourke hesitated before flipping it open. The photo on the first page was a younger Elias Ward, hair shorter, face harder, eyes carrying the same stillness he'd shown on the course. Below it, a line in black ink. Former tier, 1 operative. Status, presumed Kia. The details that followed were stripped to bare bones, no location, no mission name. Just the notation, operation never entered into public record. On the last page was a stamp. A coiled viper, fangs bared, encircling a shattered skull. The ink was black, the edges crisp. Rourke stared at it for a long moment. Ghost viper. He'd heard the stories, the kind that were passed in low voices between men who'd been in too long to be impressed by most things. Units that vanished from rosters, operatives who came back different if they came back at all. By the next morning, whispers had already begun. No one said Elias's name out loud, not where it could be tied back to them. But eyes followed him when he walked past, and conversations thinned when he stepped into earshot. Briggs, once loud enough to fill half the yard, barely spoke above a mutter now, and he didn't meet Elias's eyes again for the rest of training. Weeks later, the Gauntlet came down. Officially, the reason was structural adjustments for safety compliance. But the recruits who'd been there knew better. The replacement was taller, longer, more unforgiving. Someone joked it was built to stop the next janitor who tried to break it. Most didn't laugh. They just called it what the rumor mill had already decided, the janitor's run. Elias never tried it. By then he was gone again, mop bucket and all, leaving behind only the course he'd changed and a silence that didn't need explaining.